Marilyn Monroe died on August 5, 1962. That part is fact. But here's the question that's haunted historians, biographers, and fans for over 6 decades. What if she wrote things down that never made it into any official file? What if there were pages, notebooks, fragments of thought that could rewrite everything we think we know about her final years? This is not a claim that those pages have been found. This is a theory, but it's a theory built on something real because Marilyn Monroe genuinely did keep journals. She genuinely did write letters that still surface in auctions and estates. And there are genuine gaps in her story that historians still argue about today. So stick with us, because in the next few minutes, we're going to walk through what we actually know, what's been rumored for decades, and why so many people believe there's more to Marilyn Monroe's story than the world has ever been told. If that question interests you even a little, keep watching. Because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you think. To understand why this theory even exists, you have to understand something most people get wrong about Marilyn Monroe. The public saw a blonde bombshell, a movie star. A punchline in some circles, a goddess in others. But the woman behind that image was someone almost nobody actually knew. Norma Jean Mortensen was born in 1926 in Los Angeles. Her childhood was chaos, foster homes, an absent father, a mother who struggled with mental illness and was eventually institutionalized. By the time Marilyn Monroe became a household name, Norma Jean had already lived through more instability than most people face in a lifetime. And here's the thing biographers keep coming back to: Marilyn was a reader. A serious one. She owned hundreds of books. She studied acting technique obsessively. She wrote poetry. She kept notebooks. This isn't speculation, this is documented. In 2010, a book called Fractions was published, containing actual handwritten notes, poems, and letters from Marilyn's own estate. Real pages, real her. So we already know she wrote. We already know she reflected on her pain, her fears, her ambitions in private, on paper. The question this video is built around is simple. If she wrote that much that we've already seen, what else did she write that we haven't? That's not a wild leap. That's a reasonable question. And it's one that's fueled decades of theories, some more credible than others. Let's ground this in fact before we go further into theory, because the last 12 months of Marilyn's life are genuinely one of the most scrutinized periods in celebrity history. In 1961 and into 1962, Marilyn was going through immense upheaval. Her marriage to playwright Arthur Miller had ended. She'd been in and out of psychiatric care, including a stay at a New York clinic that reportedly terrified her so badly she begged Joe DiMaggio to get her out. She was working on a film called Something's Got to Give, and production was in turmoil. She was often late, sometimes absent, and was eventually fired from the picture, though she was in negotiations to return before her death. She was also, by multiple documented accounts, seeing a psychiatrist named Dr. Ralph Greenson extremely frequently, sometimes almost daily in her final weeks. That's an unusual level of contact for a doctor-patient relationship, and it's one of the details historians keep circling back to when they ask what was really going on in her mind during that time. Then there's the politics. It's well documented that Marilyn had connections to the Kennedy family. Her famous Happy Birthday, Mr. President performance in May 1962 is real, filmed, and part of the historical record. The nature and extent of her relationships beyond that public appearance has been debated by historians and biographers for decades, with wildly different conclusions depending on who you ask. So here's where the real story already sounds like fiction: a woman under psychiatric care, entangled in complicated relationships, working through fame that had become a cage, connected however loosely to the most powerful family in America, dead at 36 in her own home. The facts alone are staggering, and they're exactly why so many people believe there had to be more that she wrote down somewhere. Marilyn Monroe's official cause of death was ruled probable suicide by acute barbiturate poisoning. That is the official record, but almost immediately, questions started, and they never really stopped. The timeline of her final night has never been fully agreed upon. Housekeeper Eunice Murray gave shifting accounts over the years about when she found Marilyn and when she called for help. There was reportedly a delay before authorities were contacted. Some biographers have pointed out that her phone records from that night were allegedly requested and went missing. Whether that detail is fact, exaggeration, or myth has been argued for 60 years, and no version has ever been definitively proven. This is important. We are not claiming there was a cover-up. We are saying that enough unanswered questions exist that serious researchers, not just conspiracy channels, have spent decades trying to fill in the gaps. Books like Anthony Summer's Goddess spent years interviewing people connected to Marilyn's final days and found accounts that didn't line up cleanly with the official story. And this is exactly the kind of environment where a theory like secret notes takes root. When the official record has holes in it, people naturally start asking, did she leave something behind that could fill them? Imagine, for a moment, a woman who knew her life was spinning out of control, a woman who wrote constantly, who processed her fear and her fame through pen and paper her entire life. Is it really such a stretch to imagine that in her final weeks, she wrote about what was happening to her? Not because we have proof she did, but because everything we know about her personality makes it entirely plausible. That's the foundation of this theory, not proof. Plausibility built on a real pattern of behavior. Now here's where the theory gets genuinely interesting, because we don't have to imagine everything from scratch. Real documents connected to Marilyn have surfaced over the decades, and each one adds a little more fuel to the idea that more is out there. In 2010, as mentioned earlier, fragments was published by Marilyn's own estate, containing handwritten poems and notes found among her belongings. In these pages, she wrote about loneliness, about the exhaustion of being watched constantly, about her complicated feelings toward the people in her life. These are real, verified, and publicly available. If you've never read them, they reveal a woman far more introspective and literary than the public image ever suggested. Separately, private investigator Fred Otash, a real figure hired at various points by Hollywood studios and public figures, reportedly compiled files related to surveillance around Marilyn in her final months. For years, rumors swirled that Otash had recordings or documents describing what he'd learned. In 2018, some of his papers were reportedly set to be auctioned, and reports at the time suggested they touched on Marilyn's final days, though the full contents and their reliability have never been independently verified to everyone's satisfaction. This remains disputed territory, not settled fact. Then there are the auction houses. Items belonging to Marilyn, letters, notes, personal effects, surface at auction with some regularity. Julianne's Auctions, which handles a significant amount of Hollywood memorabilia, has sold personal letters and notebook pages from her estate over the years, each one giving fans and historians another small puzzle piece. Put all of this together, and you get a picture, not of one dramatic reveal, but of a slow drip. Fractions emerging over decades, never quite completing the picture, always leaving room for the question, what if the biggest piece hasn't surfaced yet? That question is the entire premise of this video, so let's actually build out the theory. If, hypothetically, additional private writings from Marilyn's final year were ever found and verified, what would they realistically contain, based on everything we already know about her state of mind? First, historians widely agree she was processing deep psychological pain in that period. Multiple people close to her described her as increasingly isolated, increasingly paranoid about being watched or recorded, and increasingly distrustful of people around her, including some in her own inner circle. If she wrote about that fear in detail, it would likely read less like a movie star's diary and more like a person unraveling in real time, painfully aware that no one around her seemed able or willing to help. Second, given her documented connections to political figures, some researchers have long speculated that any personal writings from that period might touch on relationships or conversations she found too sensitive to discuss publicly. To be absolutely clear, there is no verified document proving specifics here. This is the part of the theory that lives entirely in speculation, and honest researchers treat it that way. But it's exactly the kind of content that keeps this theory alive online, because it would explain the intensity of interest in her final months that persists to this day. Third, and maybe most human of all, biographers believe any late writings would likely reflect a woman trying to reclaim identity. Norma Jane, not Marilyn Monroe. Someone who spent her adult life performing a version of herself the world demanded, and who may have used private writing as the one place she could simply be a person, tired and afraid and hopeful all at once. None of this is confirmed. All of it is theory, but it's theory built from a real, consistent pattern. A woman who wrote her whole life, going through the most turbulent year of her life, right before her death. If there is more out there, this is roughly the shape it would likely take. Here's what makes this different from a typical internet rumor. This theory keeps resurfacing because of a pattern. Every few years, something new does emerge. Letters, notes, recordings, all real, all incremental. Each one reignites the same question. Because unlike most historical mysteries, Marilyn's estate and family circle is still, decades later, occasionally releasing or auctioning new material. That means, unlike a closed case with no new evidence possible, this is technically a live situation. There genuinely could be more material sitting in a storage unit, an estate archive, or a private collection somewhere, simply because so much of what already surfaced did so exactly that way, quietly, unexpectedly, decades after her death. This is why researchers, biographers, and fans keep this conversation alive. Not because of hard evidence of a specific hidden diary, but because the track record shows fragments really do keep appearing, and nobody can say with confidence that the well is dry. Think about how strange that is. Most historical mysteries eventually go cold because there's simply nothing left to find. Marilyn Monroe's story is one of the rare ones where new small real pieces of evidence have continued surfacing across 6 decades. That alone is enough to keep any theory alive, and it explains why, every time even a rumor of new documents circulates, it goes viral instantly. People aren't just curious about celebrity gossip. They're responding to a genuine historical pattern that keeps proving them right to stay curious. Before we go further, it's worth pausing on something that gets lost in all the theorizing. Marilyn Monroe was a real person, and this endless speculation about her death and her private thoughts has a human cost that's easy to forget. Her friends and family, what remained of them, spent years frustrated by a public that treated her death like entertainment rather than a tragedy. Joe DiMaggio, who remained devoted to her memory until his own death, reportedly refused to discuss her publicly for the rest of his life and arranged for fresh flowers to be sent to her crypt for 20 years. That's not the reaction of someone who saw her as a mystery to be solved. That's grief. So as we explore this theory, it's worth remembering that whatever she wrote, if anything remains undiscovered, it belonged to a woman who spent her entire adult life having her privacy stripped away by a public that couldn't get enough of her. If secret notes ever do surface, the conversation shouldn't just be what did she say, it should also be about whether she'd have wanted any of it read at all. That tension, between fan curiosity and respecting a person's memory, is part of why this remains a sensitive topic, even 60+ years later. It's a real ethical question researchers and biographers wrestle with every time new material does surface. It's worth being honest about where mainstream historians land on this. Most serious Marilyn Monroe biographers, people who've spent literal decades on her story, are cautious about any claim of a dramatic hidden discovery. They'll tell you that most bombshell Marilyn stories that circulate online turn out to be either recycled old material, misattributed quotes, or outright fabrications designed to generate clicks. At the same time, these same historians generally agree the full picture of Marilyn's final year has never been completely assembled. Files from the original 1962 investigation were reportedly incomplete or went missing over the years. Key witnesses gave inconsistent accounts, and multiple biographers over the decades have said, in their own words, that they believe there's more to the story than has ever been publicly confirmed. So the honest answer sits in the middle. No credible historian is claiming a secret notebook has been found and is being hidden from the public right now. But many credible historians agree the story isn't fully complete, and that new fragments of her life do continue to surface unpredictably. That's the space this theory lives in, not fabricated proof, but a genuinely reasonable what-if built on real, ongoing incompleteness in the historical record. That distinction matters, and it's why we've framed this entire video as a theory from the very first sentence. Let's play this out one more layer. Hypothetically, if verified new writings from Marilyn's final year were ever authenticated and released, what would actually happen next? Realistically, the reaction would be massive. Marilyn Monroe remains one of the most recognizable cultural figures on the planet, more than 60 years after her death. Any verified new personal writing from her would dominate entertainment news cycles for weeks, get picked apart line by biographers, and almost certainly reignite old debates about her death, her relationships, and the psychiatric care she received in her final year. It's also likely something like this would face immediate scrutiny over authenticity. Given how many rumors and forged items have circulated around Marilyn's estate over the decades, any new discovery would need serious forensic verification, handwriting analysis, paper and ink dating, and a documented chain of custody before serious historians would treat it as real. That process alone could take months or years, and there's the ethical dimension we already touched on. Any responsible publication of new material would likely involve consultation with her estate, careful editorial framing, and public debate about whether private thoughts from a deeply troubled period of someone's life should be published at all, regardless of historical value. None of this is happening right now. This is a hypothetical walkthrough of what a real discovery would look like, based on how similar situations have played out with other historical figures' private papers. It's a useful exercise because it shows just how complicated even a genuine discovery would be to confirm and release responsibly. Here's something worth sitting with as we wrap up. This theory isn't really just about Marilyn Monroe. It's about how little we actually know about the people we think we know the most. She was one of the most photographed, most discussed, most written about women of the 20th century, and yet 60+ years after her death, serious historians still argue about basic facts of her final months. That should tell you something about fame itself, that visibility and understanding are not the same thing. The more the world watched her, the less it seems anyone actually knew her. That's probably the real reason this theory has so much pull. It's not just curiosity about a celebrity mystery, it's a kind of hope that somewhere there's a version of her story told entirely in her own words, without a studio, a publicist, or a headline shaping it. A version where Norma Jean finally gets to speak for herself. Whether that version exists in some box, in some archive, or whether it simply doesn't exist at all and never did, is something we may never know for certain. But the fact that so many people are still asking the question 6 decades later says everything about how much she still means to people. So to bring this all together, no, there is no confirmed discovery of secret Marilyn Monroe notes that rewrite her story. That's not what this video claimed, and it's not what's happening. What we do know is that she was a genuine writer her whole life, that real fragments of her personal writing have surfaced over the decades, that her final year remains one of the most scrutinized and unresolved periods in celebrity history, and that historians themselves admit the full picture has never been completely assembled. Put those facts together, and you get a theory that refuses to die, not because of hoaxes or fabricated leaks, but because the real story genuinely still has gaps in it. That's rare. That's why this conversation isn't going away anytime soon. If new material about Marilyn Monroe's final months ever is verified and released, you can be sure it'll be one of the biggest entertainment history stories of the decade, and we'll be covering it the moment it happens. Until then, this remains exactly what we said at the start, a theory worth exploring, not a confirmed fact. If you want to be here the moment something real does break, make sure you're subscribed, because when this story moves, we'll be the first to bring it to you.